Hi everybody, so just a quick check-in about the time limit on the DBQ this year and a strategy that might help if you are experiencing any of these three things over here. So if you are not regularly getting full credit on the evidence points on the rubric, which is 3, if you're struggling to finish in 45 minutes and ready to change your thinking just a little bit, then this is the system for you. So let's start by looking at how the DBQ will be scored in 2020. If we add up these points, you'll see that there's 10 points possible. And what we're going to focus on now is that these three areas have partial points available to them. And if we look over here at this description of where the points are coming from, you can see that if you were to focus on 2 documents only out of 5, you could still get 2 points in evidence, 2 points in sourcing, and 2 points in outside evidence. And so we see these 2s right here. So what that means is we're only giving up 1 point in evidence. So a 2-document DBQ can earn a maximum of 8 out of 10 points. And this is a great score. So we're going to talk about the possibility that you would focus on 2, maybe 3 documents. Let's see what that looks like. This is what a 2-document DBQ would look like. You would still have an intro paragraph. You'd still have context. You still have thesis, like always. This doesn't change. In your first body paragraph, you would talk about 1 document. You would still have a full paragraph. You'd have a topic sentence that presented half of the argument in the thesis. You do your evidence, your sourcing, and your outside evidence. Then you'd go on to your second body paragraph, and you'd have a second document with the same information. Just a reminder with this plan, the success criteria is exactly the same. The requirements do not change for these things, but you might have some more time if you're only dealing with 2 documents. If you think you can do a great job with a 3rd document, you can do that, and you would just put it in the appropriate paragraph. You know, maybe in this paragraph you're talking about the spread of Christianity, and there's 2 documents that support that. So it would just go in the correct spot. Now let's think about some considerations if you are considering doing this. First, you have to have these paragraphs, and you have to have a 2-part answer to your thesis. So make sure that you are answering the question, that you have a full thesis, and it's possible that the 2 documents you pick will be in the same paragraph. So that's okay, but don't change your thesis just because you have this 2-document plan. You're going to have to read all the documents. You won't know what are the 2 you're going to pick until you've read all of them. The way you should pick them is the ones that you can have the strongest response and that fit your argument. So if you don't understand a document, then you wouldn't include it. Or if there's one that's particularly hard to do with sourcing, you might not include it, because in this plan, if you pick 2 or 3 docs, you're going to need to do evidence, sourcing, and outside evidence for all of them. So one of the tricky things about this system is if there's a picture and you think you can do an evidence sentence with it, but not sourcing, it's going to be hard. You're going to be giving away that point. So I would say if there's a document that you think, you know what, I can really knock it out of the park with evidence, but I'm stuck on sourcing, then you probably should try to have 3 documents so that you can try to get that extra sourcing point with the other one. Here's the key with this plan. This is the most important thing. You're going to need to write more than we have been. The reason we have said your evidence sentence equals 1 sentence is because we've been helping you try to finish an entire essay about all the documents in the time limit. But if you're only talking about 2 documents, it's totally fine and probably required for you to take 2 or 3 sentences for any or all of these things. So just make sure that the success criteria is followed and write as much as you need to. So you might have an entire paragraph, you know, maybe it's 8 to 10 sentences and it's only about 1 document because you're using all that time. You're spending 10 minutes, let's say, writing about 1 document. So the tricky thing about this plan is that you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. If you only do 2 documents, in order to get full points, you need to be able to check off all these things. You need your evidence to meet the criteria, you need your sourcing, and you need your outside evidence. It's kind of a no mistakes version of doing this, which is why you should definitely plan on taking the whole 45 minutes. Don't go into this and think, I'm only writing about 2 documents, I can be done in 20 minutes, and then I can just hang out. That's not the point. The point is to really slow down and go into super detail about it. So in your studying for the exam, you might want to consider revising one of your essays like this. You might want to try, if you haven't written the final DBQ yet, and you're interested in this plan, you could do it with the 2 or 3 document plan. So we'll post these slides on Classroom for you to reference, and it might be something to think about. Remember, if you are struggling with time, or if you're not routinely getting all those points anyway, but you might get the point if you slowed down and wrote more. So we'll take a look at a sample essay and see what this 2 or 3 document plan looks like. This is a template that you can use regardless of how many documents you choose. So it's just got a reminder of the success criteria. The context and the thesis will stay exactly the same. Your topic sentence is still the first half of the 2-part answer in your thesis. And then what we have over here are some sentence frames that you can use when you write about the documents. And what you can see is that this whole paragraph with the 2 document plan has 1 document, evidence and sourcing, and then outside evidence, and then we'll get to the second body paragraph. So you can just use these to help you get those sentences started, and they're just a reminder, and I would recommend printing out this template and having it with you. Just a couple of reminders. It says here for the evidence, remember that if the document is a visual document such as a map, a graph, a picture, a table of numbers, your evidence will be a specific description of that document. So the template repeats for the second body paragraph. It looks exactly the same. And what we'll do is spend a minute looking at the sample. And the sample is based on the Unit 6 Assessment DBQ. This was the one about African nations' responses to the European scramble for Africa and imperialism during this time period. So in this example here, we're using 2 documents. We're using 2 and 3. Document 2 was about the leader of the Herero people saying that they are taking up arms against Germany. And document 3 was the Emperor of Ethiopia appealing to other Christian nations for help. Okay, so I went ahead and put a sample in these boxes. And for context, I have my context here. There are specific details such as the colonization of various countries, the Spanish taking over the Americas and using them for slave labor and raw materials, that there was a competition for profit from industrialization, and that those were used by industrialized European nations, that the Berlin Conference and Scramble for Africa started a rivalry between European powers to produce and gain money. So this is all context that works. We have a thesis that presents a 2-part answer. This is the lead-in part right here, which is number 4. The responses to imperialism and the scramble for Africa is number 5. And then it says some states responded through violent uprising because they had no other option. That would be the first part of the answer. And other states responded by negotiating because they were too weak to fight back and use cultural connections. That's the number 6. So this whole thesis also meets success criteria. So what we did was we took the first half of our answer. Some states responded to the scramble by fighting because they felt they had no other option, and are using that in the topic sentence of the first body paragraph. So I'm using this sentence frame here, and I'm just plugging in numbers. So document 2, describe the document. It's a letter from the leader of the Herero people to another African leader. And the template says shows that, so I have shows that. And here is my answer to the question. Here is my proof of the first half of the answers, which is that they fought. Shows that some African nations use violence to fight back against the scramble for Africa. So here I've taken care of success criteria 9 and 10. And now I'm going to have another sentence in which I take care of 11 and 12. So I'm using this sentence frame right here as, and I'm plugging in the author, Samuel Mahero says, and here's my paraphrase evidence. Since the Germans are killing their own citizens, it's better for all of Africa to rise up and die fighting than to die at the hands of Europeans. And that takes care of 11. And then I have my citation, which is number 12. So up here, I said some African nations use violence. And down here, rise up and die fighting is my proof or my evidence that they use violence. And you might want to go back, and I'll just go really quickly and take a look at the document itself, where it says here, I appeal to you to make your voice heard so that all of Africa may take up arms against the Germans. Let us die fighting rather than die as a result of maltreatment. Tell all the chiefs down there to rise up and do battle. This is the part that I paraphrased. What's new here is that I use 2 sentences to take care of the evidence requirement. Now I'm going to use 2 sentences to take care of the source requirement. The first will identify the source information, and I use this frame right here. This document is written by Samuel Mahero, who was the leader of the Herero people and wrote a letter to another African leader in 1904. That's me pointing out the source information. And in a second sentence, I'm going to go on and do the analysis part. Because, here's my relevant information, Mihira was the leader of his people. And this is hard to do a sentence frame for, so what I have to do next is just explain the source. He wanted to protect them. So he appeals for help from another tribe so we can have a better chance at fighting against the superior German military. That is my explanation for why he says what he says. And so these two sentences together meet the sourcing requirement. Now I'll get to outside evidence, and just like with sourcing, there's a two-part success criteria, so I'm going to handle those in two separate sentences. First, I'm going to identify my evidence. Another piece of evidence that shows some African people fought back, see how it says that shows the prompt answer I gave in the topic sentence? So in my topic sentence I said some African nations fought, was, and here's my evidence, Samari Touré's war against the French in West Africa. So far I'm just identifying. And now in the next sentence I will explain how that supports my argument. His many attempts to stop the French from taking over French West Africa, again I'm talking about Samori Touré, his many attempts to stop the French from taking over West Africa show that the Mahero people were not the only ones to fight against Europe, but many other Africans felt there was no other option but to use force to prevent takeover of their own territory. What I'm doing here is taking this information and connecting it back to my topic sentence, which said that the Africans were fighting. So with these two sentences, I have met my requirement. Now the same process happens a second time. I take the second half of my thesis, which was negotiating, and I put it in the topic sentence. I take the second document I'm using, which is document 3, and I say it's a letter from Ethiopia's rule to European powers, and it shows that Ethiopia wished to bargain with European powers rather than fight. As Menelik II says, he hopes that the European powers will not attack Ethiopia, but instead get Ethiopia land along the seacoast. That's my paraphrase evidence. So these two things together handle the evidence requirement. This one says the answer that they want to bargain, and this one has the proof that they wanted to bargain. Then I'll have two sentences to deal with the source info. In the first one, I talk about who it is, Menelik II. He's the emperor of Ethiopia, and he wrote a letter to other European powers. Because they are Christian, he appeals to the shared religious beliefs and points out it would be better to prevent Muslim powers from getting the land, hoping to make his own country more wealthy and avoid the fate that other African nations suffered. And so this one is designed to explain this. So these two guys together are the sourcing requirement. I have my two sentences for outside evidence. Another piece of evidence that shows a pattern of negotiating, remember that was my topic sentence answer, were treaties signed between the United States and Native Americans. So I've identified the evidence, and then here's where I explain it. During the Westward Movement, many Native American cultures signed treaties and restricted reservations because they were harmed by disease and did not have the power to fight back, so they chose to rely on land given to them, just as Menelik requested in his letter. So again, I'm going back to my topic sentence about why countries negotiated. And so just to kind of show you the way this looks as a whole essay, this is taken exactly from up above, just not in the boxes. So this is my intro. If I was scoring this, I'd put a C for context right here and a T for thesis right here. I would read this first paragraph, which is all about document 2. I would read these two sentences, the first one that says they use violence, and the second one that has the paraphrase, and I would score these as evidence. I would look at these two sentences, the first that says this guy was the leader, and the second that says why he says what he says. I'd score that as sourcing. And I take these two sentences, the first that talks about Samori Touré, and the next one that explains, and I would score those as outside evidence. And then I would come down and look at my second and last body paragraph. I would score these two sentences as my evidence. I would score these two sentences as my sourcing, and I would score these two sentences as my outside evidence. And on the rubric, which is out of 10 points, I would have 1 point for context, I'd have 1 point for thesis, I'd have 2 points for evidence, I'd have 2 points for sourcing, I'd have 2 points for outside evidence, which would give me an 8 out of 10, which is a great score. And the idea is that I can get a better job talking about documents if I spend all this time only talking about one document. Hope that helps, and let us know if you have any questions. Happy studying!